Could you grab me a coffee, sunshine? 2 Splendas, almond milk. And try not to spill it this time, this suit is Armani. Marcus Hammond didn't look up from his phone as he barked the order at me. He never did. In the 18 months I'd worked as his executive assistant at Hammond Financial Solutions, I'd become less a person and more a piece of office furniture to him, functional when needed, invisible otherwise. Of course, Mr. Hammond, I replied, forcing a smile even though he wasn't looking. That was my life at 27. Olivia Parker, invisible coffee fetcher, note taker, appointment maker, and occasional emotional punching bag for one of Boston's most celebrated young financial advisors. The man who'd been named 30 Under 30, Finance Edition by Boston Business Journal 3 years running. The man whose family name was on the building. The man who made my professional life a waking nightmare. As I walked to the break room, I caught my reflection in the glass walls of the conference room. There I was, 5'4", size 16, mousy brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, glasses sliding down my nose, dressed in another forgettable beige ensemble designed to blend into the background. Exactly where Marcus preferred me to be. I hadn't always been this person. In college, I'd been vibrant, outspoken, confident despite my size. I'd graduated summa cum laude from Northeastern with a degree in finance, ready to take on Wall Street. Then reality hit. The finance world wasn't exactly welcoming to women who didn't fit the polished, slim, fashion model image. Especially women who looked like me. After 6 months of rejections, I'd been desperate enough to take this assistant position, telling myself it was a foot in the door. Now, 18 months later, the only thing I'd gained was 20 more pounds from stress eating, a wardrobe full of beige, and the ability to predict exactly how Marcus liked his coffee depending on his mood. As I prepared his almond milk concoction, Zoe from marketing bounced into the break room. Unlike me, Zoe was everything the finance world celebrated: tall, thin, blonde, confident, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Morning, Liv," she chirped, reaching for a Keurig pod. TGIF, am I right? Any exciting weekend plans? My exciting weekend plans involved my couch, my cat Felix, and the new season of The Great British Bake Off. But I couldn't tell her that. Just catching up on some reading, I said vaguely. Zoe smiled sympathetically. We weren't close, but she was one of the few people in the office who actually spoke to me like a human being. Well, if you want to join us, a bunch of us are going to Vanguard tonight. That new club in Seaport? It's Madison's birthday. Madison Hayes was Marcus's girlfriend, model gorgeous, trust fund rich, and about as deep as a puddle. She also happened to be the daughter of Richard Hayes, CEO of Hayes Investments, one of our biggest client accounts. Thanks, but I'm not really a club person, I said, which was both true and an understatement. The thought of me, plus-sized, socially awkward me, at a trendy Boston nightclub surrounded by the beautiful people of Hammond Financial was the stuff of nightmares. Suit yourself, Zoe shrugged. But the invitation stands if you change your mind. I nodded, knowing I wouldn't, and headed back to Marcus with his precious coffee. When I returned to his office, he was engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. I set the coffee down silently and turned to leave. No, Richard, I guarantee it's a solid investment, Marcus was saying, his voice taking on that smooth, confident tone he used with important clients. My team has run the numbers exhaustively. Hayes Investments could see a 30% return within 18 months. I froze midway to the door. That didn't sound right. Just yesterday, I'd organized Marcus's research files on the Apex technology proposal he was discussing. The projected returns were 15% at best, with significant risk factors. I'd compiled all the data myself. Absolutely, I understand your concerns, Marcus continued, swiveling in his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. But trust me on this one. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. My stomach twisted as I realized what was happening. Marcus was deliberately misleading Richard Hayes, his girlfriend's father and one of our most important clients, about the Apex investment. This wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal. I must have made a noise, because Marcus suddenly spun his chair around, his eyes narrowing when he saw me still standing there. "Let me call you back, Richard," he said smoothly. "My assistant just brought in those files we discussed." He ended the call and fixed his cold blue eyes on me. "Something you need, Olivia?" The smart thing would have been to say no and leave. To pretend I hadn't heard anything. That's what invisible Olivia would do, but something snapped inside me. "The apex projections," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite my racing heart. "They're nowhere near 30%. The report shows 15% at best, with significant risk factors in years 2 and 3. Marcus's expression hardened, but he quickly recovered with a dismissive laugh. "I appreciate your concern, but I've been doing this for a decade. I think I understand investment analysis better than someone who makes coffee and schedules my meetings." The condescension in his voice was like a slap. "I have a finance degree from Northeastern," I reminded him. "Summa cum laude." "And yet here you are," he replied with a cruel smile, gesturing to the coffee I'd just delivered. "Making coffee." He stood up and walked around his desk, towering over me. "Let me make something very clear, Olivia. Your job is to assist me, not question me. What happens between me and my clients is none of your business. If you have a problem with that, there are plenty of other eager graduates who would kill for your position." The threat was unmistakable. In that moment, looking at his smug face, I realized two things simultaneously. Marcus Hammond was a fraud, and I had been allowing him to diminish me for far too long, but I also knew that if I pushed this now, I'd be fired on the spot. And while my job was soul-crushing, my bank account couldn't handle unemployment. "You're right," I said, lowering my eyes in a show of submission. "I apologize." "Good," he nodded, already dismissing me from his thoughts. "Now, I need you to book me lunch at Sorellina at 1 o'clock. Madison wants Italian." Just like that, I was back to being furniture. "Of course, Mr. Hammond." As I walked back to my desk, something had changed inside me. Maybe it was hearing Marcus lie so blatantly. Maybe it was the vicious way he'd thrown my education and aspirations back in my face. Or maybe it was simply 18 months of accumulated frustration finally reaching critical mass. Whatever it was, I made a decision right there in the hallway of Hammond Financial Solutions. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It started small, with me staying late that Friday evening after everyone had left for Madison's birthday celebration at Vanguard. I went through Marcus's files, making copies of the Apex documentation and several other suspicious investment proposals. I wasn't sure what I would do with them yet, but it felt good to take action. The next phase of my plan came together that weekend. For 2 days, I researched everything I could find about Marcus Hammond, his clients, and Hammond Financial's investment portfolio. I created spreadsheets. I made timelines. I looked for patterns. What emerged was disturbing. This wasn't a one-time occurrence with Richard Hayes. Marcus had been systematically overpromising returns to select clients for at least a year, focusing primarily on friends and family connections who trusted him implicitly. He'd been hiding the real numbers in obscure corners of our filing system, assuming that no one, certainly not his invisible assistant, would connect the dots, but I had. And now I needed to decide what to do about it. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a new resolve. I'd spent Sunday stress baking 3 different types of cookies, my go-to anxiety management technique, while weighing my options. I could report Marcus to the Securities and Exchange Commission, but without more concrete evidence, it would be his word against mine. I could confront him directly, but that would likely result in immediate termination. I could approach one of the other partners, but the Hammond and Hammond Financial Solutions meant Marcus was practically untouchable. No, I needed to be strategic. I needed to build a case while protecting myself. And I needed to start standing up for myself in smaller ways first. Morning, sunshine, Marcus greeted me with his usual disinterest as he swept past my desk. Coffee is on your desk, I interrupted, something I never did. Along with your morning briefing, your call sheet, and the quarterly reports you asked for last week. He paused, seemingly surprised both by my interruption and my efficiency. Also, I continued before I lost my nerve, I've scheduled your lunch with the Peterson account at 1 o'clock, moved your 3 o'clock meeting to tomorrow per Mr. Galloway's request, and confirmed your dinner reservation at Mistral for your anniversary with Madison tonight. Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off his rhythm. Right. Good. That's efficient. One more thing, I added, feeling a small thrill at having his full attention for once. I've been reviewing the Apex technology files, and I've prepared an alternative analysis that I think addresses some of the risk factors more comprehensively. Now his eyes narrowed. Did I ask you to do that? No, I admitted. But given my finance background, I thought it might be helpful to offer a different perspective. I don't remember asking for your perspective, he said coldly. Stick to your job, Olivia. With that, he disappeared into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Step 1, get his attention. Check. Step 2 was going to be more challenging. Over the next 2 weeks, I implemented what I called Operation Visibility. I started speaking up in meetings instead of just taking notes. I offered substantive comments on investment strategies. I sent Marcus detailed analyses of client portfolios, highlighting both strengths and concerns. I stopped dressing in beige and started incorporating color into my wardrobe, nothing flashy, just enough to stop being part of the wallpaper. Most importantly, I started documenting everything. Every misleading statement Marcus made to clients. Every time he dismissed valid concerns about investment risks. Every unethical corner he cut. I built a comprehensive file, securely stored on an encrypted drive that never left my possession. Marcus was increasingly irritated by my new approach, but he was also distracted by a major new potential client, Eastview Ventures, a venture capital firm with deep pockets and a reputation for aggressive investment strategies. Marcus had been pursuing them for months, and they'd finally agreed to a pitch meeting in 3 weeks. Landing Eastview would mean a massive commission and partner track for Marcus. He talked about nothing else. Meanwhile, I had made another decision. If I was going to remake my professional life, why not remake my personal life as well? The truth was, I'd been hiding behind my size for years, using it as an excuse to avoid social situations, dating, and putting myself out there. Just as I'd allowed myself to become invisible at work, I'd allowed myself to become invisible in life. So I joined a gym. Not one of those fancy fitness studios with willowy instructors and intimidating equipment, but a neighborhood gym with diverse body types and a no-nonsense attitude. I found a trainer named Darius who specialized in working with beginners and didn't make me feel like an alien for not knowing how to use an elliptical properly. Fitness isn't about getting skinny, Darius told me during our first session. It's about getting strong. It's about respecting what your body can do, not punishing it for what it looks like. That perspective was revolutionary to me. For the first time, I started exercising not because I hated my body, but because I wanted to see what it was capable of. I also revamped my wardrobe, with the help of my roommate Jasmine, who worked as a stylist for a plus-size fashion blog. The problem isn't your body, Jasmine declared as we went through my closet one Saturday, discarding bland piece after bland piece. The problem is you've been dressing to disappear. Let's dress you to be seen. We spent the day shopping for clothes that actually fit and flattered me, jewel-toned blouses that brought out the green in my eyes, well-structured blazers that highlighted my waist, pants that didn't bag at the knees. Clothes that made me feel like a finance professional, not an apologetic afterthought. Now for the hair, Jasmine said once we'd tackled my wardrobe. Before I could protest, she'd made an appointment with her stylist friend Miguel. This bun has got to go, honey, Miguel declared when I sat nervously in his chair. You've got gorgeous thick hair, and you're treating it like it's a burden to be contained. Let's set it free. 2 hours later, I had shoulder-length layers with honey-colored highlights that brightened my whole face. Miguel also convinced me to trade my practical but unflattering glasses for contacts, opening up my face in a way I hadn't expected. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked like a different person, but because I looked like the person I'd forgotten I could be: confident, professional, present. There she is, Miguel nodded approvingly. The real Olivia. On Monday morning, I walked into Hammond Financial Solutions feeling like I was wearing armor. My navy blue dress fit perfectly, my new hair swung freely around my shoulders, and for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't trying to blend into the background. The reactions were immediate. The security guard, who usually barely glanced at my ID, did a double take. The receptionist's eyebrows shot up. Zoe from marketing actually gasped and hurried over. "Olivia. You look amazing," she exclaimed. "What brought this on?" I smiled. Just felt like time for a change. The real test came when Marcus arrived. He walked past my desk, coffee cup in hand, then stopped abruptly and backed up, staring at me as if trying to process what he was seeing. "Olivia?" "Good morning, Mr. Hammond," I replied calmly. "Your 9:30 with Johnson Capital is confirmed, and I've prepared the presentation materials as requested." He continued to stare for a moment, then seemed to shake himself. "Right. Good." He paused, then added awkwardly, "You look different." "Thank you," I said, though it wasn't exactly a compliment. For the first time since I'd started working for him, Marcus Hammond seemed genuinely discomfited by my presence. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Operation Visibility was working. The next 2 weeks were transformative, both professionally and personally. At work, I continued to assert myself in small but meaningful ways. I spoke directly to clients when appropriate, contributed in meetings, and made sure my finance expertise was on display. I wasn't confrontational with Marcus, but I was no longer submissive either. Outside of work, I kept up with my training sessions with Darius, feeling stronger and more energetic each week. I wasn't losing dramatic amounts of weight, but that wasn't the point anymore. I was gaining confidence, stamina, and a sense of ownership over my body that I'd never had before. Jasmine convinced me to join her and some friends for drinks one Friday night, my first social outing in months. To my surprise, I actually enjoyed myself. I even exchanged numbers with Alex, a graphic designer with kind eyes and a genuine interest in my thoughts on the economics of the craft beer industry. But as I was building my new life, I was also building my case against Marcus. The more I paid attention, the more disturbing patterns I discovered. Marcus wasn't just exaggerating potential returns, he was actively misleading clients about risk factors, burying unfavorable data in footnotes, and in some cases, presenting outdated or manipulated analyses. Most concerning was his strategy for the upcoming Eastview Ventures pitch. From what I could piece together from his notes and conversations, he was planning to present wildly optimistic projections based on cherry-picked data and conveniently ignored market indicators. If Eastview invested based on those projections, they could potentially lose millions. The ethical thing would be to report him immediately. But the realistic part of me knew that without ironclad evidence and significant backup, a complaint from an assistant against the son of the firm's founder would go nowhere. I needed more. I needed the smoking gun. It came 3 days before the Eastview pitch, in the form of an email Marcus accidentally copied me on. It was to his college friend Tyler, who worked in data analysis at a competitor firm. "Need you to massage these numbers for the Eastview deck," the email read. "Current projections showing 12 to 15%, but I need to get them to 25% minimum. We'll make it worth your while. Usual arrangement." There it was. Clear evidence of fraud. I stared at my screen, heart racing. This was what I'd been waiting for, but what would I do with it? If I reported Marcus now, he'd deny everything, delete the evidence, and fire me for insubordination. If I went to the other partners, there was no guarantee they'd side with me over the Hammond heir.no. I needed to be even more strategic. I needed to wait for the perfect moment, a moment when Marcus couldn't wiggle out of the consequences of his actions. And that moment was coming in just 3 days. The Eastview Ventures pitch, the morning of the pitch, the Hammond Financial Conference Room was a flurry of activity. Marcus had assembled a team of 6 people, including me, surprising everyone by announcing I would be attending to take notes and manage the presentation materials. What nobody knew was that I had spent the previous evening preparing my own version of the pitch deck, one with accurate numbers, honest risk assessments, and realistic projections. I'd also done something else. I'd forwarded Marcus's incriminating email to my personal account and sent copies of all my documentation to both the SEC and the firm's ethics compliance officer, with instructions to open the files only if they didn't hear from me by the end of the day. It was my insurance policy that as we waited for the Eastview executives to arrive, Marcus was uncharacteristically nervous, straightening his already perfect tie and reviewing his notes for the 5th time. "This is it," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "Land this account, and I'm fast-tracked to partner." I nodded sympathetically, feeling the USB drive in my pocket like a talisman. My alternative presentation was ready to go, but I still wasn't entirely sure how, or if I'd use it. Part of me hoped that facing the Eastview executives would make Marcus reconsider his fraudulent pitch. That maybe, at the last minute, professional ethics would prevail. That hope died the moment the Eastview team walked through the door. There were 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman, all radiating the confident aura of people who managed billions of dollars for a living. Marcus immediately shifted into his charming host persona, making introductions around the room. "And this is Olivia Parker, my assistant," he said when he got to me, barely glancing in my direction. "She'll be managing the technical aspects of the presentation today." The woman from Eastview, Sharon Chen, their chief investment officer according to my research, gave me a quick but perceptive once-over. Unlike Marcus, she actually made eye contact with me, offering a brief but genuine smile. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began once everyone was seated. "We at Hammond Financial are excited to present what we believe is an unprecedented investment opportunity." He launched into his pitch with practiced confidence, moving through the slides I had prepared, the legitimate ones, showing the company background, market position, and initial projections. But I knew what was coming. Slide 12 was where the fabrications began. As Marcus clicked to advance, I felt a strange calm settle over me. 18 months of diminishment, dismissal, and disrespect crystallized into perfect clarity. I thought of all the clients who trusted Hammond Financial with their money. I thought of my finance degree, my skills, my integrity. I thought of the person I'd been before I allowed Marcus Hammond to make me feel invisible. "Before we continue," I said, standing up just as the fraudulent projections appeared on screen, "I believe there's an important clarification needed on these numbers." The room went silent. Marcus froze, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. "Olivia," he said through gritted teeth, "perhaps we can address any concerns after the presentation." "Actually," I replied, my voice steady despite my pounding heart, "I think the Eastview team would want to know that the projections you're about to show them are fabricated." You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus's face went from red to white in an instant. "That's absurd," he sputtered. "Olivia is clearly confused." "I'm not confused," I interrupted, pulling the USB drive from my pocket. "In fact, I've prepared an alternative presentation with the actual data, the actual risk assessments, and the actual projected returns." I turned to the Eastview team. "Returns that are significantly lower than what Mr. Hammond was planning to promise you today." Sharon Chen's eyes narrowed. "Is this some kind of good cop/bad cop routine?" "It's not," I assured her, plugging the USB drive into the laptop. "And I have evidence that Mr. Hammond knowingly intended to present false information." I pulled up Marcus's email to Tyler on the screen for everyone to see. Marcus looked like he might actually pass out. You can't, I'll have you fired for this." "For what?" I asked calmly. "For preventing fraud? For protecting potential clients from being deliberately misled? For doing my job with integrity?" I turned back to the Eastview team. "I've worked at Hammond Financial for 18 months. During that time, I've documented multiple instances of Mr. Hammond exaggerating returns, minimizing risks, and misleading clients. I've attempted to address these issues internally but have been consistently dismissed. The room erupted into chaos. Marcus was shouting. The Hammond financial team was murmuring in shock. Two of the Eastview executives were angrily gathering their materials to leave, but Sharon Chen remained seated, her eyes fixed on me with what looked like respect. "Show me," she said, cutting through the noise. "Show me your version of the presentation." Ignoring Marcus's continued protests, I pulled up my honest assessment of the investment opportunity. "These are the actual projections based on complete market analysis," I explained, moving through the slides. "The opportunity is still solid, but the return is realistically 12 to 15% over 3 years, not the 25% Mr. Hammond was promising. And there are significant risk factors in year 2 that need to be hedged against." For the next 20 minutes, I walked through the honest assessment while Marcus slumped in his chair, defeated. When I finished, Sharon nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Parker, could you step outside with me for a moment?" Heart still racing, I followed her into the hallway, away from the tense conference room. "That was quite a display of professional courage," Sharon said once we were alone. "Not many people would risk their job that way." "I care more about my integrity than my job," I replied honestly. "And I believe clients deserve the truth, even when it's not as attractive as a lie." Sharon studied me for a long moment. "Your analysis was impressive. Thorough, balanced, realistic. Where did you study finance?" "Northeastern. Summa cum laude. And yet you're working as an assistant to a man who clearly doesn't value your expertise." I shrugged. The job market was tough when I graduated. This was supposed to be a foot in the door. "Well," Sharon said with a small smile, "consider a different door opened. Eastview has been looking to expand our analysis team. Someone with your attention to detail and ethical compass would be an asset. Would you be interested in discussing a position with us?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an interview," she clarified. "But based on what I've seen today, I'd be surprised if it didn't lead to an offer." She handed me her business card. "Call my office tomorrow to set it up." As she turned to rejoin her colleagues, who were now filing out of the conference room, she paused. "Oh, and Miss Parker? That navy dress is an excellent choice. Always trust a professional who understands both numbers and presentation." I clutched her card, hardly believing what had just happened, as the Hammond financial crisis team arrived, summoned, no doubt, by one of Marcus's panicked texts during my presentation. Within minutes, partners from legal, compliance, and executive leadership were huddled in the conference room, voices raised, gathered my things, knowing I'd likely never sit at my desk again. On my way out, Zoe from marketing caught up with me by the elevators. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen," she whispered, eyes wide. "The whole office is talking about it already. Marcus Hammond, taken down by his invisible assistant. Legendary." As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the Hammond financial office, the place where I'd allowed myself to be diminished for so long. I felt oddly calm. Whatever happened next, I would face it as the real Olivia Parker. Visible. Heard. Unapologetically present, the aftermath was both better and worse than I'd expected. Worse, because Marcus Hammond was indeed the protected son of the founder. Despite the evidence I'd provided to the ethics compliance officer, the official story that emerged was that Marcus had resigned to pursue other opportunities. No charges were filed. No public scandal erupted. Hammond Financial closed ranks and paid millions to make it all go away, including a surprisingly generous severance package for me, accompanied by an aggressively worded non-disclosure agreement. Better, because Sharon Chen was true to her word. My interview at Eastview Ventures led to a job offer, not as an assistant, but as a junior financial analyst, with a salary nearly double what I'd been making at Hammond Financial. A real finance career, at last. 6 months later, I was settling into my new role at Eastview when I ran into a familiar face at a financial conference in Chicago. Marcus Hammond, looking considerably less polished than the last time I'd seen him, was working a booth for a small regional investment firm I'd never heard of. He saw me before I could slip away, his eyes widening in recognition. "Olivia." "Marcus," I replied coolly. He glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "I heard you landed at Eastview." "I did." "Look," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "What happened?" I know I was out of line. "The pressure to perform, the expectations, it's not an excuse." "But, you're right," I interrupted. "It's not an excuse." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Anyway, I just wanted to say, you were right about the apex numbers. And I should have listened to you sooner." It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from Marcus Hammond, it was practically a confession of sins. "I appreciate that," I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. "I hope things work out for you." As I turned to walk away, he called after me, "You look good, by the way. The weight loss suits you." I stopped and turned back, smiling tightly. "I haven't lost any weight, Marcus. Not a pound. What you're seeing is confidence. It weighs exactly the same but looks completely different." The bewilderment on his face was priceless. Walking away, I felt the last remnants of invisible Olivia dissolve completely. I hadn't needed to transform my body to transform my life. I'd just needed to stop allowing others to define my worth. The real magic of my transformation wasn't in changing how others saw me, but in changing how I saw myself. Not as furniture, not as an apologetic afterthought, but as a woman with value, expertise, and a voice that deserved to be heard. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't taking Marcus down or landing a better job, though both were undeniably satisfying. The greatest revenge was reclaiming myself, piece by piece, until I was whole again, visible. Present. Unapologetically Olivia, the END.